And so now, starting the next chapter, we're gonna go destroy the ring. It should be easy, you know, no problem. And this has turned into a horror book. This is so scary. Also, Frodo is like 50. Who knew? So recently I bought a bind up of all of the Lord of the Rings books, and in this video I'm gonna read the Lord of the Rings. So I have seen the films of the Lord of the Rings, and I also read The Hobbit when I was younger, but I've never read the Lord of the Rings. And I think that's partly because one of my favourite parts about reading is the unknown. I love being surprised by the twists and turns the story takes. And so because I've already seen the films, that sort of has prevented me from picking up the Lord of the Rings, because I was like, I already know what's going to happen. But I decided that because I love fantasy and I do love the films of the Lord of the Rings, I should read this, and I'm very glad I decided to, because I'm a little ways into the book now and it is fantastic. There is stuff in here that's not in the movies, and also the writing is just beautiful. There's something very simple and profound about it. Also, the book invokes a lot of feelings within you. The book has made me frightened, made me pensive, made me calm. And in this video, I'm gonna go through my reading experience of The Lord of the Rings. So I've now finished the first 2 chapters and also the beginning part about the history of hobbits. I enjoyed learning more about hobbits. I really liked the quote, "The hobbits like to have books filled with things they already knew, set out fair and square with no contradictions." And the second chapter of The Fellowship of the Ring is one of the best setups for a fantasy book I've read. So the second chapter is predominantly just a conversation between Frodo and Gandalf, and they talk about the history of the rings and how the ring that Frodo has is the ring to rule them all. They talk about Smeagol and how he became Gollum, and they talk about how Sauron is really coming to get that ring. Like, they need to get out of the Shire and destroy that ring, like, ASAP. So I'm officially hooked. I'm like so wanting to just read this book and do nothing else. Also, Frodo is like 50. Who knew? So I've come across the first major difference between the films and the books, and that is Tom Bombadil. He's such a great character. I love him. So Tom Bombadil is full of a lot of enthusiasm for life, and he sings a lot. And I'm listening to the audiobooks narrated by Andy Serkis as well as reading the physical copy. And Andy Serkis is so good at the different voices, and he's especially good at the songs. And I'm about 8 hours into the audiobook, and we haven't made it to Bree yet, or the Prancing Pony, but the chapter I just finished spoke about how the next stop is Bree and the Prancing Pony. So we're getting there. So I've now finished the chapter, The Council of Elrond, and some stuff has happened. So the hobbits met Strider, aka Aragorn, who's probably my favourite character. There is a part where the hobbits are all like freezing and cold, and it says that Strider was content with a single cloak and sat a little apart, drawing thoughtfully at his pipe. He just seems like the guy that you want on your team. He's very good in a crisis. We love Aragorn. And then eventually the hobbits, Aragorn, they managed to make it to Rivendell. And in Rivendell, Frodo meets lots of different characters. One of those characters is Gloin, and Gloin was one of the 12 dwarves in The Hobbit. And so when he meets Gloin, they chat a bit about The Hobbit, which is quite fun. Fortunately, I have read The Hobbit before, so I get the references. And then I thought a really sweet bit was when Gloin says, "You were very fond of Bilbo, were you not?" to Frodo, and then Frodo says, "Yes, I would rather see Bilbo than all the towers and palaces in the world." And that's just so sweet. Frodo is so sweet. And then a short time after that, he sees Bilbo again and they have a nice reunion. And then we have the Council of Elrond, which I really enjoyed. We meet lots of different characters, the elves, the dwarves. Gandalf tells his story of how he kind of got trapped by Saruman, who isn't a good guy. And at this point we start to learn more about the world, because prior to the Council of Elrond we've only really seen from Frodo's perspective, and we do know some like details about the world from his conversations with Gandalf, for example, but here we get like the history of Isildur, and we learn about Minas Tirith, and we also learn that Sauron was a necromancer in Dol Guldur. And the world suddenly just becomes a lot more rich in history and detail, and you realise that in the Shire they have a very limited perspective on Middle Earth, because you know, the Shire is just a cute, lovely place and they just want peace. And so now, starting the next chapter, we're going to go destroy the ring. It should be easy, you know, no problem. So we're now in the mines of Moria, and this has turned into a horror book. This is so scary. So Gandalf and the rest of the gang, they find some old letters that were written by the dwarves that were in the mines previously, before the orcs overran the place and took it over. And it says, the last thing written is in a trailing scroll of elf letters. They are coming. And then once they read they're coming, they start to hear these big thunderous booms from down the hall. So it says, doom, doom, it rolled again, as if huge hands were turning the very caverns of Moria into a vast drum. And so that's where I'm up to at the moment. And yeah, we gotta get out of the mines and hopefully not get killed by the orcs. So quite a lot has gone on, and the latter half of Fellowship of the Ring is very similar to the movies. I did notice a slight difference. Gandalf says, you cannot pass, instead of you shall not pass. And then what happens with Boromir when he frightens Frodo, because Boromir is a bit drawn to the power that the ring contains, is very similar to the movies as well. Also, they go to Lothlorien and meet Cate Blanchett. And then the end of the Fellowship is Frodo going out on his own, and then Sam goes to go with him, and that's such a sweet moment because Sam is just the best. And now I'm 3 chapters into the Two Towers, and I have been quite surprised because the Two Towers is really the first time we're not seeing from Frodo's perspective. I mean, the whole of The Lord of the Rings is sort of written from an omniscient point of view, but a lot of the Fellowship is just really following Frodo's story. We rarely see any scenes that Frodo is not a part of, if any. However, The Two Towers begins really from Aragorn's perspective with Legolas and Gimli, and they are going after Merry and Pippin. And then we also see from Merry and Pippin's perspective with Treebeard, and then it goes back to Aragorn's perspective. And we haven't seen from Frodo's perspective again yet. So I did look a little bit ahead, because I was like, when are we seeing from Frodo's perspective? And it looks like the Two Towers are split into 2 parts. So the first part is going to be like Aragorn and Merry and Pippin, and then the second part we're going to see Frodo's story and the continuation of that. And also, I just want to comment on a few quotes that just highlight how beautiful the writing is. The taste brought back to them the memory of fair faces and laughter and wholesome food in quiet days now far away. And little furtive figures that in the dim light look like elf children in the deeps of time, peering out the wildwood in wonder at their first dawn. There's something quite simple about the writing, yet very profound. And just because I say the writing is quite simple, that does not mean the world is. The world is very complex, so I think it makes sense that the writing doesn't make the story more complex. The writing really allows the story to feel accessible because the writing doesn't really cloud your view at all. And yeah, let's go meet the guys at Rohan. Woohoo! So I've now finished the Two Towers, and it took me a bit of a while to get through the Two Towers. I think because the journey that all the characters are going on is really quite challenging. So sometimes I didn't really feel like I wanted to go into the book because it's quite anxiety inducing in ways. I think when I'm reading, more than any other art form, I really get invested in the stories, and I really feel immersed in the worlds, and like I'm a character in those worlds. So sometimes if I am feeling a little bit anxious, I find it quite hard to read stories that are scary or that are very like emotionally challenging, which I would say Lord of the Rings is. The characters go on a really challenging journey, and to be a character alongside them, it's kind of hard sometimes. And I really enjoyed Two Towers. I think I enjoyed it as much as the Fellowship. Maybe if I had to pit them against each other, I would say I enjoyed the Fellowship just a little bit more, because I think my favourite perspective in the story is Frodo and Sam. I just think the journey to destroy the ring is the most interesting part of the book. That being said, I do still very much enjoy the perspective of Aragorn and Merry and Pippin, because I think it makes the world all the more detailed and all the more richer. And I really like the part in the book when they're going up the stairs of Cirith Ungol, and Sam says, as he always does, a really lovely thing. He says, "The brave things in the old tales and songs, Mr. Frodo, adventures as I used to call them, I used to think that they were things the wonderful folk of the stories went out and looked for, because they wanted them, because they were exciting and life was a bit dull, a kind of sport, as you might say. But that's not the way of it with the tales that really mattered, or the ones that stay in the mind. Folk seem to have been just landed in them. Usually, their paths were laid that way, as you put it. But I expect they had lots of chances, like us, of turning back, only they didn't. And if they had, we shouldn't know, because they'd have been forgotten." What I love about that quote is that a lot of this book is about perseverance and not giving up, and that quote sort of sums up that theme. So I'm happy to announce that we have now destroyed the ring. And a part in The Return of the King that I really liked is when Eowyn is fighting the Nazgul, and the Nazgul says, "Hinder me, thou fool, no living man may hinder me." And then Eowyn says, "But no living man am I, you look upon a woman." I also really like how at the end her and Faramir get together. I think it's really sweet. There's like a chapter after they destroy the ring where we see from Eowyn's perspective, and yeah, her and Faramir, what a cute couple. Also, we destroyed the ring, and this part really highlights what great a friend Sam Gamgee is. Frodo would have never done this without Sam. I really like the part where it says, "Sam gave Frodo a mouthful of water. Only one more mouthful remained. He went without himself," because it just highlights how selfless Sam is. Also, one of the most annoying parts in the book is when Frodo says, "I will not do this deed, the ring is mine." And it's like, Frodo, I mean, I understand the ring is very powerful and finally it has taken a hold of Frodo at the last very moment. The ring itself does not want to be destroyed. And as a reader, it's really well written. I appreciate it. It's also very annoying. But then, fortunately, Gollum arrives and he's like, "My precious," and then slips and falls into Mount Doom. And yes, now I've nearly finished the book. At the point in which the ring is destroyed, there is still 9 hours of the audiobook left. Yeah, and I'll update you when we finally reach the end of the quest. So I'm back. It's now a bit later in the day and I finished The Lord of the Rings. Yay! So initially, after destroying the ring, the hobbits start to return back to the Shire, and it takes them a while. And they come across Treebeard again, and Treebeard starts talking about Saruman and what happened to Saruman, and I'd kind of forgotten about Saruman, to be honest. And Treebeard says that he let Saruman go because he'd like lost all his powers after the Isengard was taken over and the ring was destroyed. So Treebeard says, "A snake without fangs may crawl where he will." And Gandalf is like, "Yeah, that's true, but this snake still has one tooth left. Like, I don't know if he's that harmless." And then the hobbits arrive back in the Shire, and the Shire is like overrun with ruffians, and all the hobbits are like hiding in their little holes. And it's like become a terrible place to be, very unsafe. And the hobbits, because now Frodo and Sam, Merry and Pippin are back, then start to fight against these ruffians to reclaim the Shire as their own. And there is the Battle of Bywater, and it's one of the only battles that the Shire has ever seen. And then I was very shocked to find out that Sharky was actually Saruman, and Saruman had gone to the Shire to take it over, perhaps in like revenge for Frodo and how Frodo destroyed the ring. And what I found interesting is that it says in the footnotes that in Orcish, Sharku means old man. So the orcs were calling Saruman Sharku, which is kind of funny. And then Wormtongue is the one who kills Saruman, and then Wormtongue is killed by the hobbits, and then the Shire is okay again. And also the book ends about here, and the rest of the book is the appendices, which I will get to eventually. So before I finish, I want to give you my final thoughts on The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I loved this. I remember thinking when I was maybe a quarter of the way into the book that this book is some kind of cure, and I still maintain that perspective. This book made me feel so much better about the world, even though it contains a lot of dark things. I think because one of its main themes is how the goodness of people prevails in spite of all the darkness that exists in the world. And the way it's written is really quite philosophical and pensive and detailed. It's really hard to pick a favourite character as well, because I think each character has a really necessary role within the story. I really love Frodo, Sam and Gollum, and also Gandalf. I love Gandalf's parts. He always has such wisdom. And I want to leave this video with a poem that Bilbo says at the very end of the chapter Many Partings. I think it maybe exists earlier in the book as well. Anyway, he says, "The road goes ever on and on, out from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road is gone, let others follow it who can. Let them a journey new begin, but I at last with weary feet will turn towards the lighted inn, my evening rest, and sleep to meet." Thank you very much for watching this video. Do you like Lord of the Rings? Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye bye.